Hello, everybody. It's been quite a while since we've met together.
Sanibonani nonke sekuyisikhashana singahlangani.
Let's open with a word of prayer.
Ngiyavula ngezwi lomkhuleko.
Holy God, we thank you
uNkulunkulu wethu ngcwele siyabonga
for the privilege of being alive at this moment in Earth's history.
ngale sibusiso sokuthi sibe
I ask that
siyaphila
you would
kulesi
guide,
sikhathi
direct,
emhlabeni.
and bless,
Ngiyacela ukuthi usihole
and that the Holy
usikhokhele
Spirit would guide and direct us through this
nomoya
series of meetings.
ongcwele ube nathi kule ifundo
Be
lesi.
with us and bless us.
Ube nathi
I
sibusise.
pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Ngiyakhuleka ngegama likaJesu. Amen.
Sorry, I was thought that was going to get translated. That's why there was a delay.
Bengithi kuzotolikwa lokho.
I have two presentations this weekend,
Nginezifundo ezimbili kule viki leli.
and I wanted to do some revision
Ke bengifisa-ke ukuthi sibuyele emuva
and some reminders of what has already been taught.
neyikhumbuzo-ke zezinto esiye sazifunda ngamuva.
So before I begin, I want to say that I'm going to be doing a presentation based upon Acts 27,
Manje-ke ngingakaqali ngifuna ukusho ukuthi isifundo sami siyogxila ku-Acts 27
and I also want to acknowledge that I got quite a bit of help in putting this together.
futhi-ke ngifuna ukusho-ke ukuthi ngiye ngathola usizo mangihlanganisa lokhu
From one of the competent and very knowledgeable Bible workers in Zimbabwe.
kwabanye-ke abafundisayo laphaya eZimbabwe bafundisa kahle kakhulu.
So I wanted to just draw some lines
Mina ngifuna-ke ukubhala ama-lines.
You're all familiar with these.
Sonke siyakwazi lokhu.
So this is the line of the 144,000.
Leke iline ye-144,000
All relatively straightforward.
ilula-ke.
I've asked for the chat to be switched off. I normally would like to have it on, but if we have it on, then we'll have too many people responding.
Ngicele-ke ukuthi i-chat ivalwe ngoba-ke uma singayivula kungaba yinkinga ngoba kungaba nabantu abaningi abakhulumayo kumele kube nomuntu ozobaphendula
So I'm
futhi.
having to do this all by myself.
Manje-ke ngifuna ukwenza lokhu ngingedwa.
So we'll now draw the line of the priests.
Sizobhala-ke futhi abapristi iline.
And this is where we get problems because it all gets squashed up.
Lapho-ke sizoqala ukuba ney'nkinga ngoba siyahlangana manje.
And then the Levites.
Bese-ke kuba namaLevi.
and then the Nethinims.
bese ke kuba nama-Nethinim.
So I apologize that it's out of scale.
Ngiyaxolisa-ke ukuthi ke ayihambiselani kahle.
So we're familiar with these lines,
Kodwa
intimately
ke
familiar.
siyawazi lama-line, siwazi kakhulu.
And you all are familiar and understand how we cascade these waymarks through these histories.
Niyazi-ke nonke ukuthi lama-waymark siwahambisa kanjani kule mlando lo.
So this would be the Sunday law,
Kuyoba yi-Sunday law lapho,
Sunday law,
nalapho futhi Sunday law,
Sunday law.
nalana beyi-Sunday law.
And then you have the close of probation for each of those groups.
Bese-ke kuzoba ne-close of probation, ukuvalwa komusa.
So the reason I drew these
Isizathu-ke sokuthi ngizibhale lezi zinto
is because within the movement,
ukuthi la ku-movement
there's a burning question that everybody is having.
kunalo mbuzo-ke wonke umuntu awubuzayo.
And that question is,
Lowo
if we
mbuzo-ke
are in this history over here,
ukuthi-ke lo mbuzo uma sikulo mlando lo ola,
I'll put a star here.
ngizofaka-ke i-star lapho.
First of all, it looks like our line has finished.
Okokuqala-ke kuya ngathi iline yethu isiphelile.
And then the question is, where are the Levites?
Bese-ke umbuzo ukuthi apha ama-Levite.
So I think people are concerned, are worried that there are no Levites joining us.
Abantu-ke bayazibuza-ke ukuthi awakho ngani ama-Levites.
And if there are no Levites joining us,
Futhi-ke
what will happen when we get to this history here for the Nethinims?
uma-ke ama-Levites engekho kuye kwenzeka njani-ke uma sesifika kulo mlando lo wama-Nethinim?
So I'm not saying that I have an answer to this dilemma,
Angisho-ke ukuthi nginempendulo yale nkinga,
but I think it would be interesting
kodwa-ke ngiyacabanga ukuthi kungaba yinto
if people wanted to private message me and tell me
ethize.
where are the Levites? Why are they not joining us?
Mhlambe-ke abantu bangangithumela imilayezo bangitshela ukuthi akuphi ama-Levites, kungani engekho nathi manje.
So I want to say, don't give me the following answer.
Ngifuna-ke ukuthi ngisho ukuthi ninganginikezi le mpendulo le
The reason there are
elandelayo.
no Levites coming is because there are sinners in the camp.
Yokuthi isizathu sokuthi kungabi nama-Levites ingenxa yokuthi kunezoni
Or the movement is
enkonzweni,
in rebellion,
noma u-movement uhlubukile,
or it's in a Laodicean condition.
noma isesimeni lesi se-Laodicea.
So those three situations that I spoke of
Lezo zimo lezo zintathu engizishoyo
are really a singular issue,
zonke zimayelana nento enye,
that there's some kind of failure in the movement.
ukuthi inkinga ila ku-movement.
Oh, there's one more I didn't add, sorry.
Kunenye engingayifakanga futhi lapho,
Don't blame me,
ungathi inkinga yimi.
by which I mean don't blame the leadership.
Ngaloko ngizama ukuthi-ke singathi inkinga yilaba
I
abaholi
don't
bethu.
believe that the reason that there are no Levites coming in is because of a failure by the institution of this movement or individuals.
Angicabangi ukuthi isizathu sokuthi ama-Levites angabi khona ingenxa yokuthi u-movement noma abaholi bo-movement banenkinga.
So if you try to give me your thoughts, your
Uma-ke
feedback over the next 24 hours, when we meet tomorrow, we'll have a short discussion about what people's thoughts and ideas are.
uma-ke ningazama-ke ukunginikeza imicabango yenu bese masibuya sihlangana futhi ngizozama-ke ukuthi sikhulume ukuthi abantu bayibona kanjani le nto.
Oh, there's one more. I forgot. There's another one.
Khona enye futhi bengisengikhohliwe.
There are lots of negative reasons.
Kunezizathu ey'ningi engasiyizona.
We made a mistake.
Enye ukuthi senze iphutha.
So that's a reason that people might think that maybe we've gone wrong somewhere.
Esinye isizathu-ke mhlawumbe abantu bangasicabanga ukuthi mhlambe kunephutha elithize esilenzile.
Which is why we want to have a brief discussion about Acts 27.
Kungakho-ke sifuna ukuxoxa kancanyane ngo-Acts 27.
Now, I know today there are many people in the movement that don't really go into Daniel and Revelation.
Ngiyazi-ke namhlanje abantu abaningi abangeni noma abasafundi kakhulu ngoDaniel
I
11.
don't know if people are studying it privately, but there are very few studies that I am aware of where people are speaking about those two books.
Angazi-ke mhlawumbe ukuthi endaweni zabo abantu bayakufunda lokhu kodwa-ke sobala bambalwa kakhulu abantu engibaziyo bafunda lokhu.
Several years ago,
Kule minyaka-ke esidlulile,
we'll say before the midnight cry,
sizothi-ke kungakafiki i-midnight cry,
books of Daniel and Revelation were studied exhaustively.
incwadi lezi-ke zika-Daniel no-Revelation zafundwa kakhulu nje.
And one of the key passages for me personally,
Enye-ke indawo isicaphunu
one of the
esibaluleke kakhulu,
anchor visions
imibono noma indimana ibaluleke kakhulu
was Daniel chapter 2.
bekuDaniel chapter 2.
And if you look at Daniel chapter 2,
Uma-ke uzobuka uDaniel chapter 2,
it's clear
kucacile
that there is a
kusobala nje
movement that is created
ukuthi kunalo movement-ke owakhwayo
by God's hand, by God's power,
owakhwa ngesandla sikaNkulunkulu, amandla kaNkulunkulu,
that is taken from the church.
ekhishwa ebandleni,
The church of Laodicea, the
le
mountain
bandla-ke
of Daniel 2.
lika-Laodicea, intaba le kaDaniel chapter 2.
And when you start taking that model,
Make uqala-ke ukubuka-ke leyo
and
model
then you
leyo
overlay Acts 27 on top,
bese ubeke no-Acts 27 ngaphezulu.
we say Acts 27, but it includes chapter 28 as well, of course.
Sithi u-Acts 27-ke kodwa ifaka futhi no-28.
And then when you take Ellen White's writings,
Uma-ke usuthatha le mibhalo ka-Ellen White,
particularly early writings and the Great Controversy,
kakhulu early writings ne-Great Controversy,
you begin to see that the picture that develops
uqala ukubona-ke ukuthi lesithombe esivelayo
is one that indicates there is more than this initial movement that will complete the work of God.
sikubonisa ukuthi kuzoba nabanye abantu ngaphandle kwalo movement lona abazoqeda lo msebenzi.
Ellen White is clear
U-Ellen White-ke
that there
uyayicacisa le
are
ndaba
people who are changing and reforming their lives,
ukuthi kunabantu abashintshayo abaphendukayo impilo zabo,
people in God's church,
abantu ebandleni likaNkulunkulu,
right up to the Sunday law.
size siyofika ngisho nakwisandelo.
So we have plenty of evidence
Nobufakazi obuningi kakhulu
that there are going to be more people than are part of this movement.
ukuthi kuzoba nabantu abaningi abadlula ngisho nakulo movement.
And then, of course, when you go to the book of Ezra,
Futhi-ke noma uya encwadini ka-Ezra
and you look at that history,
bese ubheka lo mlando lo,
and you look at Chronicles and Kings,
bese ubuye futhi ubheke i-Chronicles ne-Kings,
you see that in the history of Hezekiah, which is found in Chronicles and Kings,
uzobona-ke ukuthi kulo mlando kaHezekiah otholakala ku-Chronicles ne-Kings,
that when they want to restore the work of the temple,
ukuthi uma befuna ukwenza lo msebenzi wokuvuselela i-temple,
that work cannot be accomplished by priests on their own.
ukuthi lo msebenzi lo angeke uwenzeke wenziwa abapristi nje kuphela.
The Levites have to join them.
Ama-Levites nawo kumele abe yingxenye yalo msebenzi.
And we all know that the Levites are a consecrated group who are set apart for holy work, just as the priests.
Siyazi futhi-ke ukuthi ama-Levites nawo abantu ababekelwe umsebenzi ongcwele bayafana namapristi.
And then when you overlay that story with Ezra,
Uma-ke uhlanganisa lelo bali lelo naleli lika-Ezra,
and I want to remind us that the book of Ezra and the story that we've just spoken about are not happening at the same time. They're different histories.
ngifuna-ke usikhumbuza-ke ukuthi le bali lika-Ezra nale bali leli esikhuluma ngalo akwenzeki ngesikhathi esisodwa.
But we're using a familiar technique
Kodwa-ke siyisebenzisa le ndlela lena
where
esiyijwayele
we're taking a symbol from one history
yokuthi sithathe-ke umfanekiso kumlando othize
and then using the same symbol in another history
bese siyoyihlanganisa nenye
and projecting one on top of the other,
nomunye
or
umfanekiso
overlaying
komunye umlando bese sibeka enye phezu kwenye.
So as soon as you have priests and Levites restoring the temple,
Uma nje-ke usubona amapristi namalevi belungisa noma bevuselela
then you
ithempeli
can take those two symbols,
bese-ke ungahlanganisa lezo zinto
go
ezimbili
into Ezra,
bese uya ku-Ezra
and you can discover the Nethinims.
bese uzobona lapho ama-Nethinim.
That's a really brief review of how those three groups were created.
Yiyo-ke indlela encanyana esingasho-ke ukuthi sawakhipha
Or
kanjani
discovered, depending on
lawa
what,
amaqembu
how you
amathathu
conceptualize it.
noma ukuthi sawabona kanjani kuya ngokuthi uyibheka kanjani wena.
And I want to remind us
Futhi-ke ngifuna ukusikhumbuza
that when the temple was being restored,
ukuthi ithempeli ngenkathi-ke ivuselelwa
the priests from Jerusalem,
abapristi abasuka eJerusalem
they were helped by people from all over Israel.
basizwa abantu abasuka kwi-Israyeli yonke.
The more detailed you look at
Uma uyibhekisisa kakhulu ngokujula lento
in various stories,
kulamabali lawa ahlukahlukene,
the more evidence you have that there are indeed two groups in Adventism.
lapho-ke ubona ubufakazi obuningi bokuthi kunamaqembu amabili kwi-Adventism.
Those we call the priests and the Levites.
Ekuthiwa-ke amapristi nama-Levites.
So the question is, why are the Levites not joining us?
Umbuzo-ke yilo ukuthi kungani manje ama-Levites
As I say,
engahlanganyeli nathi.
even though I don't have an answer,
Ngiyasho-ke futhi-ke ukuthi noma
one thing that I
ngingenayo
am certain
impendulo
about,
into engiyaziyo yile
that there isn't a negative reason,
le yokuthi akusiyisizathu esingathi isizathu
a
esibi.
failure of members, leadership, or this institution.
mhlawumbe ukuhluleka kwabantu kulo movement noma abaholi noma wona lo movement.
And if that's the case,
Futhi ke uma kunjalo ke
then what's been shown to us,
into ke esiyibonayo
because
noma
we're living through this
esiboniswayo
history right now,
ngoba siphila kuwo lo mlando khona manje,
is that we must have a misunderstanding of the application.
shuthi yithini esingazwisisi kahle ke leyo application.
The Bible speaks and tells us
Uh,
that spiritual things must be spiritually discerned.
iBhayibheli ke iyasho ithi izinto zesimoya kumele zibukwe ngesimoya.
And you're all familiar with the very simple rule that we have used many times in the past.
Lonke ke niyazi ke le mthetho leyo olula kakhulu ke
Local,
siwusebenzisayo
literal,
lo othi
worldwide, spiritual.
izinto ezi-local zi-literally bese izinto ezi-worldwide
So
zi-spiritual.
we now live in a time period, in a dispensation,
Siphila ke manje esikhathini noma kumlando
where things need to be understood spiritually.
lapho ke izinto ekumele sizwisise ngokwesimoya,
And
spiritual.
what I believe has happened
Into ke engicabanga ukuthi ke iyenzakele
is that we have taken, correctly so,
ukuthi
many portions of inspiration spiritually,
ukuthi sithathe ingxenye eziningi ke zemibhalo ngokwesimoya,
but we've held on to, I want to call it some baggage.
kodwa ke sibambelele nakwezinye izinto ngizothi
And that
imithwalo.
baggage is something that's been with us for a long time.
Le mithwalo engasiyona izinto ekade siyiphethe siyithwele.
It's that we're still inclined to see things literally.
Iloko ukuthi siyathanda ukubuka izinto ngokwenyama.
So the misunderstanding that we have about our models here
Le misunderstanding ungazwisisi lama-line wethu
is not that the structures are wrong,
akusikuthi wona lama-line
it's that
wrong,
the application that we're making of those structures isn't correct.
kodwa inkinga ukuthi lama-application esiwenzayo akusiwona awaqondanga.
And I think the reason it's not
Futhi
correct
ke isizathu sokuthi angaqondi
is because we have taken things literally.
ingenxa yokuthi sithathe izinto ngokwenyama.
And when we do that,
Futhi ke uma senza kanjalo
we can end up coming to wrong conclusions and we can become disappointed.
singagcina ke sifika kuma-conclusion kuyiphetho ekungasiyizona bese
Now, if we have
disappointed.
misunderstood the line of the
Uma
Levites
ke siyenze iphutha kwilayini yama-Levite,
in application,
i-application yama-Levite,
then you can be certain that we've already misunderstood the line of the Nethinims.
kusho ukuthi ke nalapho kuyacaca ukuthi neyama-Nethinim nayo senze iphutha kuyo.
I want to encourage each of you to go back to the passages in those two books I mentioned.
Ngifuna ke ukukhuthaza abantu ukuthi babuyele ke kule mibhalo le bengisengiyishilo.
I'm going to jump forward a bit in our study.
Ngizohambela phambili ke kwisifundo sethu.
In Acts 27:28,
Acts 27 no-28,
when Paul is shipwrecked,
uma uPaul ngena
he's on the
emkhumbini
island of, the Bible calls it Melita, but we call it Malta.
lapho endaweni ekuthiwa eMalita, iBhayibheli lithi Malita, thina sithi Malta.
And what does he begin to do there?
Ufika ke wenzani lapho?
He begins to minister to the people.
Uyaqala ke usebenzela abantu.
Now, I think we're all familiar with that story enough
Ngiyacabanga ukuthi sonke siyasizwisisa kahle siyazwisisa kahle lelo bali
to understand that those people on that island are Gentiles.
ukuzwisisa ukuthi labo bantu kuleyo ndawo leyo ba ama-Gentile bezizwe
And we identify them as the Nephilim.
futhi sithi noma sibabiza ukuthi ama-Nethinim.
Now, the reason why that is significant
Isizathu-ke sokuthi sibone lokho njengento ebalulekile
is on this big line here,
ukuthi kule line lena enkulu la
line of the 144,000,
iline ye-144,000
we're in this history here
sikulo mlando la
where Paul is ministering to the islanders of Malta.
la uPaul esebenzela abantu baseMalta.
Now, when you go to early writings or more fully explaining great controversy,
Manje-ke uma uya ku-early writings noma la echazwa kahle kakhulu ku-great controversy
we know
siyazi-ke
that it's in the Sunday law history that the church goes to the world and harvests it.
ukuthi-ke ngesikhathi se-Sunday law inkonzo iyahamba iya emhlabeni futhi-ke iya iyovuna lapho.
So the story in the book of Acts
Lelo bali-ke encwadini ye-Acts
is a
Izenzo
confirmation, or we could say Ellen White is a confirmation of the book of Acts of this line.
singasho-ke sathi iyayifakazela singasho noma u-Ellen White uyayifakazela lento eku-Acts le line le.
Now Ellen White does not make this application, we're making this.
U-Ellen White-ke ukhuluma iqiniso akayenzi le application ithina esenza le
And what's so
application.
important about Acts 27,
Yini-ke le ebaluleke kangaka nge-Acts 27
when we project that onto the great controversy narrative,
uma siyihlanganisa nale indaba le eku-great controversy
we're at the close of probation,
sikwi-close of probation
and Ellen White will tell you that at the close of probation we run to the mountains.
u-Ellen White uyasho-ke ukuthi ma kuvalwa umusa sobalekela ey'ntabeni
We stop our ministry,
siyeka lo msebenzi le siwenzayo
the ministry to the
lo
world.
msebenzi lo ukuthi siyovangela umhlaba.
So you can go to Daniel 2 and see this same story laid out.
Ngaya naku-Daniel 2 ufike ubone yona le nto leyo ivezwa.
It's a very high level story, so it doesn't go into many details.
Kuyibali-ke elihambela phezulu kushuthi-ke alingeni kakhulu kuma-details.
So it's going to merge the Sunday law history and the time of trouble history, those last two dispensations.
Izohlanganisa-ke lapho isikhathi se-time of trouble nalesikhathi sokugcina.
But it clearly tells you
Kodwa-ke ngokusobala nje iyakutshela
that the stone in Daniel 2
ukuthi lelatshe leli lika-Daniel 2
the imagery changes to a threshing instrument for harvest.
iyawushintsha lo mfanekiso ibiza-ke into yokubhula uma uvuna.
And as the imagery changes to a threshing instrument,
Njengoba-ke
the
kushintsha
statue changes also to a crop, a grain.
njengoba kushintsha-ke itshe liba yilento le yokuvuna uma ubhula uma uvuna nestatue naso siyashintsha siba yiy'thelo
So the
ukudla.
wheat is threshed and separated.
Manje-ke lapho-ke amabele lawa ayabhulwa bese ayahlukaniswa.
And then it switches back to the statue and the statue is destroyed.
Bese-ke ibuyela kwi-statue futhi bese kuba ukuphela kwaso
So Daniel 2 covers
yachithwa.
the Sunday law history and the time of trouble or the close of probation.
uDaniel 2-ke uthinta isikhathi lesi se-Sunday law nalesi se-time of trouble ukuvala komusa.
Going back to what Ellen White says, at the close of probation, we flee to the mountains.
Siyabuyela-ke kuloko kusho Ellen White ukuthi makuvalwa umusa sibalekele entabeni.
And the reason we're fleeing,
Futhi-ke isizathu sokuthi sibaleke,
often we want to give a positive spin or a positive idea on our reasons.
esikhathini esiningi sifuna ukuyiveza njengento enhle le esinikazana ngezizathu ezinhle.
In fact, Ellen White indicates that we're patting ourselves on the back, we've done a good job, and now our work is finished and we will leave.
Futhi-ke Ellen White uyayiveza-ke leyo nto naye njengento ukuthi senze umsebenzi omuhle, siyazibonga bese sesiyahamba manje.
But of course, we have a very powerful story
Kodwa-ke sinebali elinamandla kakhulu
in the life and history of Elijah.
Kule bali noma umlando
Because at this
ka-Elijah,
very point here, close of
ngoba
probation,
ngaso leso sikhathi leso sokuvela komusa,
Elijah is going to go to Jezreel.
u-Elijah uzoya eJezreel,
That's a city.
kuyisithi leyo umuzi othile.
And he's going to be confronted with Jezebel.
Mayefika lapho uzohlangana noJezebel,
And in fear, he flees from her because of her wrath.
futhi-ke ngenxa yokusaba ubalekela uJezebel ngoba ubaleka ulaka lukaJezebel.
And when you read the story that follows,
Futhi-ke uma ufunda lebali leli elilandelayo,
in this history here, Elijah knows he's failed and he wants God to destroy him.
uyabona u-Elijah ukuthi uhlulekile umsebenzi wakhe futhi ucela uNkulunkulu ukuthi makambulale.
And when Ellen White comments on that history, she agrees that Elijah has failed in his mission.
Uma-ke u-Ellen White ekhuluma ngalelo bali uyavuma yebo ukuthi impela u-Elijah uhlulekile emsebenzini wakhe
Because of fear.
ngenxa yokusaba.
Now, I want to remind us how our brains are constructed,
Manje-ke ngifuna ukuthi
our minds.
nginikhumbuze-ke ukuthi ingqondo zethu zakhwe kanjani.
There's the fast brain and the slow brain.
Kukhona i-fast brain bese kuba ne-slow brain.
And unless you're familiar with this, I'm going to call it a scientific fact.
Futhi-ke ngenxa yokuthi uma ungazwisisi lento le ye-science,
When you read inspiration,
uma ufunda-ke imibhalo,
it's very easy to come to wrong conclusions.
kulula ukuthi wenze amaphutha.
And often we don't understand God's mercy.
Futhi esikhathini esiningi asizwisisi umusa kaNkulunkulu.
Instead of killing Elijah, God feeds Elijah
Kunokuthi uNkulunkulu abulale u-Elijah umupha ukudla
because he's come to his senses.
ngoba sekabona manje ukuthi ingqondo yakhe isibuyile.
Came to his right mind.
Ubuye ey'ngqondweni zakhe.
If you don't understand how the human mind works,
Uma ungazwisisi-ke ukuthi ingqondo yomuntu isebenza kanjani,
fast brain, slow brain,
lento-ke ye-fast brain ne-slow brain,
you will not understand why God is making those decisions.
angeke uzwisise ukuthi kungani uNkulunkulu eyenza lezo
It's
y'nqumo
not
lezo.
because God is merciful
Akusukuthi uNkulunkulu
on Elijah
unomusa ku-Elijah
or turns a blind eye,
noma ukuthi uNkulunkulu
but
akafuni ukuyibheka
the
lento.
human being
Akayinaki.
Elijah is created in the image of God.
Akusukuthi uNkulunkulu uyayiziba lento, kodwa uNkulunkulu uyazi ukuthi u-Elijah uyenziwe ngumfanekiso wakhe.
Which means that God has a fast brain and a slow brain.
Ukuthi uNkulunkulu une-fast brain naye ne-slow brain naye.
And God understands clearly
Futhi-ke
what Elijah didn't.
uNkulunkulu uzwisisa kahle nje lento u-Elijah bekangayizwisisi.
But Elijah, at the close of probation, had gone into fight, flight, or freeze mode.
Ukuthi u-Elijah ngalesikhathi sokuvela kwamusa bekangene kule simo lesi se-fight, flight or freeze mode sokuthi alwe ame noma abaleke.
And flight means to run, in case people,
I-flight-ke isho
in case
ukuthi
translators don't know.
ukubaleka kuchaza ukubaleka lokho uma abantu bengazi.
The natural response of a human being.
Into nje eyindalo kumuntu le.
So God is working with that human being's humanity. It's not a sin problem in the classic way that we would normally understand it.
uNkulunkulu ke uma esebenza nalowo muntu akusindaba yesono ngale ndlela le thina esingayichaza ngayo, kusinkinga yesono.
Which brings us back to Acts 27.
Leyo nto ke isibuyisela emuva ke ku-Acts 27.
When you get to this point here,
Uma ufika ke kulesi sikhathi lesi,
which is indicated on the line of the Nethinims, the end of their line,
le nto siyibona kulayini yama-Nethinim uma sifika ekupheleni kwelayini yabo.
and this is where the Nethinims are going to be ministered to.
Kulapho ke lana ama-Nethinim azovangelwa khona noma azoyenzelwa umsebenzi.
In this story,
Kuleli bali leli
we would call this the time of trouble,
singabiza leso sikhathi sithi i-time of trouble,
or we would call it the harvest.
noma singasho sithi i-harvest.
We often refer to it as Jacob's time of trouble.
Singabuye sisho sithi isikhathi sikaJakobo sobunzima lesi, Jacob's time of
Where,
trouble.
like Elijah, he wrestles with God.
Lapho ke njengo-Elijah ulwa noNkulunkulu.
But in Acts 27,
Kodwa ke ku-Acts 27
Paul is taken away by force.
uPaul uyathathwa uyaphoqelelwa.
Rome forces him to leave the island.
IRome imthatha ngenkani iyamsusa kuleyo island le.
So he no longer has access to the people of Malta.
Lapho ke akasena
The
ithuba,
people of Malta are the Nethinims.
akasakwazi ukuthi akhulume nabantu baseMalta, labantu abaleyo island.
So their ministry, or the ministry to them, must come to an end.
Lapho ke siyabona ukuthi umsebenzi wakhe lapho uyaphela, leyo msebenzi ukubasebenzela.
And I think it's important for us to understand that connection.
Ngicabanga ukuthi kubalulekile ukuthi siyibone leyo nto leyo,
That we have this line of evidence
ukuthi sinalo line le enobufakazi,
that helps us to establish
lobufakazi lobu obusizayo ukuthi sibone
that the model of harvest
ukuthi lesifundo lesi se-harvest
is the correct one.
kuyisifundo esiqondile impela.
And so that the work for the Nethinims must come to its completion at the close of probation, according to Acts 27.
Nokuthi futhi ke lo msebenzi wama-Nethinims kumele ufike ekupheleni uma sifika ku-close of probation.
So there is no mistake in these lines.
Manje ke akunamaphutha ke kulama line lawo.
Now, I'm sure that based upon our reading of inspiration,
Futhi ke ngicabanga ukuthi kusobala ukuthi uma sifunda imibhalo
that we're expecting a great work to be done in the Sunday law history as we minister to the Gentiles, to the Nethinims.
ukuthi silindele ukuthi kuzoba nomsebenzi omkhulu njengoba sivangela ama-Nethinim nama-Levite.
Based upon that model,
Ngenxa ke leyo nto leyo,
we as a movement
thina njengo-movement
have taken that model and gone back to the Levites here,
sithathile ke leyo nto sayisa la kuma-Levites,
and we've said we must therefore do a great work for the Levites and harvest them in.
sase sithi ke kusho ukuthi thina ama-Levites siwenzela umsebenzi omkhulu, sibavune sibafake movement.
But I think we're falling into the trap of
Kodwa
literalism,
ngicabanga ukuthi ke siyenze iphutha lapho ngokuthi sibheke izinto ngale ndlela le kuthiwa i-literalism,
because we have too much evidence that the structure of these lines is not at fault.
ngoba kucacile khona sinobufakazi obuningi bokuthi ama-line awekho wrong.
So as we have worked back from the Nethinims to the Levites,
Njengoba ke sibuyele emuva kusuka kuma-Nethinim siya kuma-Levite,
we can go from the Levites to the Nethinims.
singakwazi-ke ukusuka kuma-Levites siye kuma-Nethinim.
So if we've misunderstood the work that's going on in this history,
Uma-ke singazwisisanga kahle lo msebenzi wenzekayo kulo mlando,
you can be certain that we're going to misunderstood the work that goes on in this history for the
kusho
Nephilims.
ukuthi-ke nalapho kuyabonakala ukuthi nalo msebenzi wenzeka kuma-Nethinim asuzwisisi kahle.
And I want to remind us
Futhi-ke ngifuna-ke ukusikhumbuza
that in this history for the priests,
ukuthi kulo mlando lo wamapriest
there were many misunderstandings about what was happening and what was going on.
sayenza amaphutha amaningi ukungazwisisi kakhulu nje ukuthi kwenzakalani nomsebenzi ukuthi
We
uhamba
know we're in a
kanjani.
Laodicean condition.
Siyazi ukuthi kumlando
There's
we-Laodicea
so much evidence of that in our movement.
kunobufakazi obuningi obubonisa lokho.
And Laodicea,
Futhi-ke i-Laodicea
I want to express that experience in the following way.
ngifuna uyichaza ngale ndlela le elandelayo.
A love for earth more than a love for heaven.
Ukuthanda izinto zomhlaba ngaphezulu kokuthanda izinto zasezulwini.
And this attraction to earthly things takes on many forms.
Lento ke yokuthanda ezomhlaba iziveza ngendlela ehlukahlukene.
So how can it be that we've entered into a deep Laodicean condition?
Manje kwenzeka kanjani ukuthi singene kule simo esijulile nje seLaodicea?
And yet, according to this line, the priests in this history were harvested.
Kodwa uma sibheka le line siyabona ukuthi ithi amapristi sewavuniwe
Harvested for heaven.
avunelwe ezulwini.
And when that happened,
Futhi-ke uma lokho kwenzeka,
those people who remained
abantu laba-ke abasala
in the movement,
basala ku-movement,
it's not like that we became holy people and all the people that had left the movement were lost and undone.
akusukuthi thina-ke esiselela ku-movement siye sabangcwele laba abaphumile ku-movement baduka-ke balahlwa.
Because we're talking about this movement now,
Ngoba sikhuluma ngawo lo movement okwamanje
and we're in this history,
futhi sikulo mlando lo.
and in some ways we're getting worse
Futhi
than better.
ngezinye indlela siba worse kunokuthi sibe ngcono.
And the only reason I say we're getting worse is not that we're doing worse things,
Futhi isizathu sokuthi-ke ngithi siba worse akusukuthi senza izinto ezimbi kakhulu.
it's that we're not learn the lessons that we're required to and put them into practice.
Kuwukuthi asifundi le ifunde kumele sizifunde futhi sizenze siziphile.
So the sinfulness of sin seems to grow.
Futhi kanjalo-ke ububi besono kuba ngathi kuyakhula.
And so what was once acceptable today looks totally ugly.
Manje-ke lezi zinto lezi bezamukelekile mandulo masizibheka manje sizibona
Who
kuyizinto
much is
ezisabisayo
given, much is
ezimbi.
required.
Lo onikezwe okuningi uzofunwa-ke kuye okuningi.
So we already know that our understanding of harvest
Yazi-ke ukuzwisisa kwethu i-harvest
both in the line of the priests and the Levites
kule line
has been misunderstood.
kule line yamapristi nama-Levite asiyizwisisanga kahle.
And therefore we're misunderstanding the line of the Nethinims.
Kanjalo-ke siyabona ukuthi neyama-Nethinim line asiyizwisisi kahle.
Therefore we need to take heed to the events that are occurring in the world.
Kanjalo-ke mele sibuke le igameko ezenzeka emhlabeni
That we can better understand our place in the history of the end of the world,
ukuze sizokwazi ukuzwisisa kangcono-ke indawo yethu umlando womhlaba,
because it's almost certain that it's not going to be as we expect.
ngoba kusobala nje ukuthi-ke angeke kube ngale ndlela le esilindele ngayo.
I'm sure you'll agree when we begin to review the lines,
Ngiyacabanga-ke ukuthi nonke nizoyibona le nto uma sibheka ama-line.
the foundation that has been laid for us by Elder Tess is broad and vast.
Isisekelo-ke lesi esibekelwe sona u-Elder Tess sibanzi futhi sijulile.
There are so many details, so many elements.
Kunento eziningi nje lapho, ingxenye eziningi nje.
It's easy to forget all that has been taught to us.
Kulula nokuthi sikhohlwe ezinye zezinto sesizifundile.
There's just too much information to go into any kind of detail.
Kunolwazi oluningi nje ukuthi singangena kakhulu kuzo zonke lezo zinto.
So I just want to do a basic overview of Acts 27 and just take up one or two points in that story.
Funa-ke ukuyibhekisisa ngikha ngaphezulu i-Acts 27 ngikhiphe nje intonyana ezincanyane lapho.
So perhaps we should first go to the Bible.
Mhlambe-ke singaqala ngokuya eBhayibhelini.
So we're in Acts 27.
Siku-Acts 27-ke.
And it doesn't say this in verse 1. You have to go to a previous chapter.
Ayikusho-ke le ku-verse 1, kumele ubuyele emuva kule chapter esemuva.
But Paul is captive in Caesarea.
Kodwa-ke uPaul ubanjiwe lapho-ke eCaesarea.
Caesarea is in Israel.
ICaesarea iyindawo yase-Israel.
So Paul is captive in Caesarea and he's going to be sent back to Jerusalem to be judged.
Uzobuyiselwa emuva-ke eJerusalem ayokwahlulela khona.
And we know that Paul is a Roman citizen.
Siyazi futhi nokuthi uPaul uwumuntu waseRome,
And he's going to
umhlali
make a
waseRome.
defense.
Uzozivikela-ke lapho.
That only a Roman can make.
Ngendlela le yenziwa abantu baseRome
He
nje
believes he's
kuphela.
being unfairly judged.
Ubona ukuthi akahlulelanga ngendlela ekuyiyona.
If he was sent back to Jerusalem.
Uma ebuyiselwa emuva eJerusalem.
So rather than submit to that happening because he knows he will be killed.
Kunokuthi-ke ayenze lokho, akuthobele lokho, uyazi ukuthi uzobulawa.
He speaks to the Roman governor and he appeals to him and says, I want to go to Rome.
Uyacela-ke kule governor-ke ukuthi ngicela ukuya eRome, ukuya eRome.
It was the right of a Roman citizen to have their case taken up by Caesar.
Athathe bekuyilungelo lomRoma noma umuphi ukuthi athathe i-case yakhe ayise
In
kuCaesar.
today's language,
Nolwimi lanamhlanje mhlambe.
in today's imagery,
kulesikhathi lesi sanamhlanje.
Paul was making an appeal to be heard at the Supreme Court.
uPaul-ke bekayenza isicelo sokuthi ayiswe ku-Supreme Court.
Which is his right.
Bekuyilungelo lakhe futhi lokho.
And so in Acts 27 verse 1, he is going to be sent to Italy.
uya ku-X27 uzothathwa-ke ayiswe Italy.
So in verse 2,
Ku-verse 2-ke
he's going to enter into a ship of Adramyttium.
uzothathwa-ke afakwe kumkhumbi we-Adramyttium.
And it says that people pronounce this differently. Aristarchus,
Abantu-ke bayisho ngendlela ezihlukahlukene. U-Aristarchus no-Paul.
Paul, and it doesn't say, but Luke is with them.
Futhi-ke ayisho-ke kodwa-ke no-Luke naye bekakhona lapho.
There's 3 people on the boat, and they're all going to go to
Abantu
Italy
abathathu-ke lapho kulo mkhumbi futhi bonke bazoya e-Italy.
with other prisoners, verse 1, and a Roman band, a group of
Nabanye-ke
soldiers.
ababoshiwe lapho bazohamba-ke nalamasotsha aseRome.
So I know that we're all familiar with this,
Ngiyazi-ke ukuthi sonke siyakuzwisisa lokhu noma siyakwazi lokhu.
but if you look up the word
Uma ubheka leli gama
Adramyttium,
elithi Adramyttium,
the definition of the word, I'll give you 2.
incazelo yalelo gama ngizonikeza ngey'ncazelo ezimbili.
I shall abide in death. So I want us to think of, I'm going to live or exist in
Ile
death.
yokuthi-ke I shall abide in death noma ngizohlala ekufeni, ngizophila ekufeni.
Another definition is the court of
Enye
death.
incazelo-ke yona ithi inkantolo yokufa.
So it's easy to take that definition
Kulula-ke ukuthatha leyo ncazelo leyo
and say, because it's a story about
ukuthi-ke
Paul,
ibali elimayelana no-Paul
and it's talking about the
futhi
court,
ikhuluma ngenkantolo.
it's easy to imagine that the death that's been spoken of is that of
Kulula-ke
Paul.
ukuyibona ngaleyo ndlela ukuthi lokufa lokukhulunywa ngako lala ukufa kukaPaul.
And if you go to the literal
Make
story,
uya kwibali leli lamampela
that ends up what happens to Paul. He does get killed by a Roman court,
ngempela-ke
Caesar.
kuyenzeka lokuthi uPaul abulawe inkantolo yamaRoma, bulawe uCaesar.
So the Supreme Court finds him guilty of sedition and sentences him to death.
I-Supreme Court-ke imbona-ke enecala lapho bese isentensa ukuthi ayobulawa.
Now, Paul goes to Rome twice. He goes on this journey.
uPaul uya eRoma kabili-ke, uya kuleli hambo leli,
Stands before
fike ame
Caesar,
phambi kaCaesar
and he's
bese
released.
akhululwa.
Instead of running away in hiding,
Kunokuthi abaleke,
he continues to cause trouble.
uyaqhubeka abanga iy'nkinga-ke.
And sometimes later, he is captured and sent back to Rome, where he's
Bese-ke
executed by the same
ubuye
court.
athathwe futhi abuyiselwe eRoma ayokwahlulelwa yiyo
So
leyo
in the
nkantolo.
literal story, Paul will abide in death, and he will go to the court of
Kulo-ke
death.
lelo bali lamampela uPaul uzohlala ekufeni futhi uzoya enkantolo yokufa.
Now, if you were to take that surface understanding,
Manje-ke uma ubuzothatha-ke leyo nto uyikha ngaphezulu,
bring it to the end of the world,
uyiletha ekupheleni komhlaba,
you could develop all kind of stories.
ubungabuya-ke ngamabali amaningi kakhulu
The people of God are going to be killed at the end of the
ukuthi
world
abantu bakaNkulunkulu ekugcineni bayobulawa.
as the highest courts in the land, Rome, are going to sentence them to
uma
death.
le inkantolo ezinkulu kakhulu zizobahlulela zithi mababulawe.
And of course, that would be a reasonable conclusion to make.
Futhi-ke kungaba indlela ezwakalayo ukuthi ubheke leyo nto.
But you have to take the whole of the story.
Kodwa-ke kumele uyibheke yonke leli bali, kumele ubheke lonke.
And one of the beautiful elements of this study,
Futhi-ke enye indlela ezithize zokubuka lesi sifundo,
which has a pedigree, has a legacy,
futhi enomlando thize,
because it's not the first time
ngoba
this happened,
okokuqala yenzeka le nto,
is that within one story you have a repeat and enlarge.
ukuthi uma sibheka le bali kune-repeat and enlarge lapho,
Because if you trace through this
ngoba uma
story,
ubhekisisa kahle leli bali leli,
we're going to say at this moment that there are two
sizosho
ships.
sithi-ke kulesi sikhathi kunemikhumbi emibili.
There's one from Adramyttium and one from
Kona lo
Alexandria.
kuqala wase-Alexandria nalo wase Adramyttium.
Now I say two, but in fact there are three ships.
Ungasho ukuthi yi-2 kodwa ngeqiniso
And
zintathu.
upon the testimony of two or three, a thing is
Futhi-ke
established.
ngobufakazi bezinto ezimbili noma ezintathu into iyama.
So what a good priest would do,
Into-ke umpristi olungile angayenza,
which is what Elder Tess did.
into engayenzwa u-Elder Tess,
She saw through this
ukuthi
story,
wayibona le nto wayibhekisisa kahle.
and rather than being distracted by Paul, who is the theme of this
Futhi
story,
kunokuthi-ke wayibona le nto kunokuthi abhekisise kuPaul
literally,
ekuyena i-theme yalesi story.
she was able to dig deeper and see through that.
Uye wakwazi ukuyibona le nto wayibhekisisa kahle wabona ngale.
So Paul is consistent all the way through this story from beginning to end.
uPaul le bali leli ukhona kulo kusukela ekuqaleni kufika ekupheleni.
And while he's woven into this story,
Futhi-ke njengoba-ke noma ekhona kule bali
because there's only one Paul, we only have a testimony of
kodwa ngenxa
one,
yokuthi uPaul uwumuntu oyedwa, khona uPaul oyedwa, sinobufakazi obubodwa nje kuphela.
which means you could not get a repeat and enlarge in this story
Sho
easily.
ukuthi-ke awukwazi ukuthi ungenza i-repeat and enlarge kule bali leli.
What you have to do is you have to look at the history of this
Kodwa
story.
into ekumele uyenze ukuthi kumele ubheke noma ubuke ibali ubuke lo mlando wale bali.
You remember the story or the history of
Uyakhumbula
Pyrrhus.
ibali noma umlando kaPyrrhus?
Again, it's a single line of history, a single
Nalapho
story.
sibona kuyimlando wodwa.
But if you start looking in detail, you see that the story is divided into
Kodwa-ke uma
segments.
uyibhekisisa kahle uzobona ukuthi iyahlukene ngey'ngxenye.
And in that story, the division comes through geographical
Leyo nto
wars.
kulelo bali-ke siyabona ukuthi ihlukaniswe ngezimpi ukuthi zikuphi.
And you get this same repeat and enlargement.
Bese lapho uzohlangana nayo-ke le nto le repeat and enlargement.
So when you come to Acts 27,
Uma-ke ufika ku-Acts 27 no
28,
28,
it's the story of the ships that opens the key.
kuyibali lemikhumbi-ke elivula le nto le.
They become the focus of attention, or what we would say is the theme of the
Kuba
story.
yizo-ke esibheka kuzo noma ekuba yi-theme yale bali leli.
The two cities, Adramyttium and Alexandria.
lama city lamabili i-Alexandria ne-Adramyttium
They tell two overlapping stories.
afundisa amabali amabili.
And in the ship of
Futhi-ke
Alexandria,
kulo mkhumbi lo wase-Alexandria
there are two ships from the same place.
kunemikhumbi emibili esuka endaweni eyodwa.
And that becomes an important part of this story, as we
Leyo
all
nto-ke
know.
kuba ingxenye ebalulekile yaleli bali.
So we've seen enough presentations on this story, so I'm not going to go into detail and I'm not going to prove things.
Sibe ney'fundo-ke eziningi ezihlukahlukene ngale bali manje-ke angeke ngibhekisise ngokujula noma ngizame ukuchaza konke.
And I'm not going to go through all the symbology and demonstrate why those waymarks are where
Kodwa
they
angeke
are.
ngizame ukuchaza yonke into ngibonise nokuthi ngani lama waymark alapho kuleyo ndawo akuyo.
So the ships are on a journey
Manje-ke le mikhumbi le isendleleni iyahamba
and they make many
bese
stops.
iyama endaweni ezithile.
And in doing
Futhi-ke
so, we can begin to get waymarks for the ship's
ngokubona
journeys.
lokho-ke singaqala-ke ukubona ama-waymark ale mkhumbi lo la ohamba khona.
So I want us to all be clear on the methodology that is being
Manje-ke
used.
ngifuna sonke sicace ngale methodology esetshenziswayo lapha.
We're taking story after story and putting these various stories on top of one
Sithatha
another.
amabali-ke namabali bese sibeka enye phezu kwenye.
So when we come to Acts
Uma
27,
siza ku-Acts 27
what we know about this
into
story is it's the story of Paul's
into
life.
esiyaziyo-ke ngale bali leli ukuthi bali lempilo kaPaul
We can demonstrate on another line
singayiveza nakwenye iline
that this is at the end of his world.
ukuthi loku kuphela komhlaba wakhe,
The world as he
umhlaba
understands it.
njengoba yena ewuzwisisa.
This is the end of
Ukuphela
Jerusalem
kweJerusalem lokho
as it transforms from one entity to
njengoba
another.
ishintsha isuka kwenye indlela
And Paul
iya
lays this
kwenye
out
indlela.
very clearly in the book of
Uyayichaza-ke uPaul lento ngokusobala
Galatians, in the book of
kwincwadi
Galatians.
le yabaseGalatia, Galatians.
He speaks about two Jerusalems,
Ukhuluma ngabo-Jerusalem ababili,
one on earth, one in heaven.
enye emhlabeni enye ezulwini.
And the one on earth is going to come to its end. It's the end of the world.
Kuzophela-ke le yasemhlabeni la kuphela komhlaba wakhe.
So we have good reason to look at the book of Acts, the story of Paul's
Manje-ke
life,
sinesizathu esihle kakhulu sokuthi sibuke impilo le kaPaul
and look for application at
bese
the end of the
sibheke
world.
ama-application ekupheleni komhlaba.
As we go from the death of one Jerusalem and the birth of another,
Njengoba-ke sibheka-ke ukufa kweJerusalema enye nokuzalwa kweJerusalema enye futhi
a literal one
le enyama
to a
kuyiwa
spiritual
kule
one.
yesimoya.
We can take that same modeling and bring it to the end of the world,
Singakwazi ukuthatha lokho sikulethe nala emhlabeni futhi.
which is what Daniel 2 does.
Yinto leyo-ke esiyibona ivezwa uDaniel 2.
In the language of Paul, it's two Jerusalems, a mountain and a stone.
Ngelwimi-ke likaPaul amaJerusalema amabili kuba yintaba netshe.
Mountain and a stone.
Intaba netshe.
And the mountain is we're going to say literal, it's physical, it's visible, you can touch it.
Intaba ke sizothi iyinto nje ekwenyama ethintekayo into ongayibona uyibambe.
When you go to Daniel 2, the stone seems real
Uma
enough.
uya naku-Daniel 2 nalo itshe libukeka ngathi yinto ekuyinto yamampela.
But Paul is clear that it's a spiritual
Kodwa ke
Jerusalem.
uPaul uyacacisa usobala ukuthi iJerusalem yesimoya.
Because in that
Ngoba
history,
kulo mlando lo
you have a separation of church and
kulo
state.
mlando lo unokwehlukana phakathi kwe-church ne-state.
Therefore, the church must be a spiritual entity, it cannot be a physical
Kanjalo
one.
ke ibandla akusi into literal ebambekayo kodwa iyinto kumoya spiritual.
It has to have a different construction than the one that precedes it.
Iyakhwe ngendlela ehlukile kunale ibiyakhiwe ngaphambi kwayo.
In our history, we have the Seventh-day Adventist conference
Kumlando
structure,
wethu siba nomlando conference structure ye-Seventh Day Adventist.
the mountain,
Singasho sithi intaba leyo.
literal, physical, it's there.
Ikhona ngokwenyama iyabonakala ikhona.
And then you have this
Bese
spiritual
uba nalo
movement.
movement lo ke o-spiritual.
People often ask,
Abantu bahlezi
what is our
bebuza
name?
ukuthi yini igama lethu
When are we going to
futhi
have a name?
sizoba negama nini.
I would suggest
Ngasho ke mina mhlambe ngithi
that if you go back to the New
uma
Testament,
ubuyela ku-New Testament
you'll discover that the New Testament church, the Church of God, doesn't have a
uzobona
name.
ukuthi i-New Testament lelo bandla lelo likaNkulunkulu alinalo igama.
Paul will identify as spiritual
uPaul
Jerusalem,
uzoyibiza ukuthi i-spiritual Jerusalem
or the heavenly
noma
Jerusalem,
iJerusalem yasezulwini.
but he knows very well that he's using that
Kodwa
symbolically.
uyazi ukuthi usebenzisa leyo nto njengomfanekiso.
There's nothing literal about it.
Ayikho into literal lapho.
It's
Ayinalo
nameless.
igama.
And that's why we don't have a
Kungako ke
name,
nathi singenalo igama.
because we don't work on the same legal earthly basis as other
Ngoba
organizations.
asisebenzi ngendlela efanayo yomthetho organization njengamanye ama-organization.
We're a heavenly band, a movement.
Abantu ke iqembu lasezulwini movement.
So we have a strong prophetic ground why we don't have a name.
Sineyizathu ke eziqinile zesiprofeti sokuthi kungani singenagama.
So coming back to Acts
Manje ke uma
27,
sibuyela ke ku-Acts 27
we have two
nemikhumbi
ships,
emibili
and with each of those ships goes through various ports. It moves geographically through time.
uma ke leyo mikhumbi leyo idlula ke kulama-port ahlukahlukene sithi ihamba esikhathini esithile.
And as soon as you shift your focus from Paul 1 to the ships 2 stroke 3,
Uma ke ususa ke amehlo wakho kuPaul ubheka imikhumbi esingathi mibili noma sithi mithathu.
two ships from two different cities,
Imikhumbi emibili esuka endaweni ezimbili.
one pointing to death ad
Enye
Ramitium,
ikhomba ukufa i-Adramitium.
judged and found wanting.
Ukwahlulelwa bese utholakale ungalungelanga.
The court of death.
Inkantolo yokufa.
Alexandria,
I-Alexandria yona.
the protector of the people, those who protect the people.
ukuvikelwa kwabantu, labo abavikela abantu.
So there's one boat, one ship that is the protector of
Khona
people,
umkhumbi owodwa lo ovikela abantu,
and the other one speaks about a death
lo
sentence.
omunye umkhumbi wona ukhuluma nge-death sentence, ukufa.
And because it's two
Futhi-ke
ships,
ngenxa yokuthi imikhumbi emibili,
you begin to see the license to repeat and enlarge a story.
uqala ukubona lapho-ke ukuthola ilungelo lokuthi ukwandisa.
And it becomes important to understand the methodology that's being employed.
Futhi-ke kuyabaluleka lapho-ke ukuthi ubheke i-methodology esetshenziswayo.
It looks simple enough, but it's very sophisticated, and it has a long history.
Ibukeka-ke ilula yona-ke, kodwa-ke ijule kakhulu futhi inomlando omningi.
One
Umuntu
person,
oyedwa,
one line,
iline eyodwa,
two
imikhumbi
ships.
emibili.
Divide the story into two.
Uyahlukanisa-ke le bali, uhlukanisa kabili.
So once you divide that line in
Ma
two,
useuhlukanise-ke leli bali, le line kabili,
you know what you're required to
uyazi
do.
ukuthi kumele wenze njani.
You overlay them one on
Thatha
top of
enye
the other,
uyibeka phezu kwenye,
repeat and
wenza
enlarge.
i-repeat and enlarge.
This is standard operating procedure, standard methodology for this movement, and it's been so for years.
Indlela-ke esisebenzisayo kulo movement le, futhi kade sisebenzisa iminyaka.
And there are several stories, not that many, but several,
Futhi-ke namabali amaningi, hhayi amaningi kakhulu, kodwa amabali
you
amaningana.
can take one story and divide it into
Lapho-ke
two.
ungathatha ibali elilodwa uhlukanise kabili.
Now, the way you divide stories is by looking at context, looking at
Indlela-ke
symbology.
yokuthi uhlukanise amabali ukuthi ubheke i-context nemifanekiso, ama-symbol.
Remember, if Paul was the subject of this story, you would not be able to divide it. You would not be able to have a repeat and
Ukhumbule
enlarge.
ukuthi uma besikhuluma ngoPaul lana, bengeke sikwazi ukulihlukanisa le bali leli noma senze i-repeat and enlarge.
Unless you began to see a clear and distinct division in Paul's experience of what was happening in his life, and there is no such thing in
Ngaphandle
the
kokuthi
story.
ubone mhlambe indawo lapho impilo kaPaul la kuleli bali ihlukana khona, manje-ke ayikho into enjalo kule bali leli.
It's a simple story that Paul goes from Caesarea to
Ibali nje
Rome.
elilula kakhulu, uPaul usuka eCaesarea uya eRoma.
A single theme,
Into eyodwa nje.
and it's the boats that are the key to unlocking the
Kodwa-ke
story.
imikhumbi le esisiza ukuthi sichaze le bali leli.
A death sentence, ad remitium.
I-death sentence, i-ad remitium,
The protector of the people, Alexandria.
ukuvikelwa kwabantu, i-Alexandria.
So we now can establish that we can divide this story into two and overlap them.
Ukuhlukanisa lezi zinto ezimbili bese sithathe enye siyibeke phezu kwenye.
Now, the second thing we need to
Into
be
esibili-ke
clear about,
ekumele sibeke noma siyiveze sobala,
when you have
uma
overlapping stories,
namabali amabili enye phezu kwenye,
sometimes they don't begin or end at the
ngesinye
same
isikhathi
point.
awaqali noma aphele ngesikhathi esisodwa.
Often they may begin at different points but end at the same, or begin at the same point and end at
ngesinye
different
isikhathi-ke uthola
points.
ukuthi aqala endaweni efanayo aphele kwindawo engafani, noma aqala kwindawo engafani aphele kwindawo efanayo.
But something that's
Kodwa-ke
common to these
into
stories
efanayo kulamabali lawa
is that even if they may begin at different
ukuthi
times,
noma aqala esikhathini ezingafani,
often you can use symbology to align
kodwa-ke
things
ungasebenzisa
correctly.
imifanekiso ukuthi uqondise lezo zinto.
As an example,
Mhlambe-ke umzekelo,
if we were to go to
uma
the book of
singaya
Daniel,
kwincwadi le kaDaniel
chapter
chapter 11
verse 40,
verse 40,
and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him
ngesikhathi
like a
sokuphela-ke
whirlwind.
inkosi yaseningizimu izoza kuye futhi uzoza nge-whirlwind.
Have you read it? So what we see is the death of the
Into
king of
esibonayo
the
la
north,
ukufa kwenkosi yasenyakatho yena.
him. And then we see that the king of the north shall fight against him,
Bese
king of the
siyabona futhi
south.
ukuthi le nkosi yasenyakatho izobuya ilwe nenkosi le yaseningizimu.
So there's a contradiction in this story.
Inokuziphikisa la.
The king of the north
Inkosi
is
le
dead.
yasenyakatho iyafa.
The word push means to
Legama leli
fatally
lithi
wound.
uphusha lisho ukuthi ubulawa nje ngokuphelele.
And to overflow and pass over means destruction.
Overflow nokuphasa over shuthi ubulawa nje uchithwe nje kuphela.
So we know that there's
Manje-ke
a
siyabona
problem in
ukuthi
the verse.
kunenkinga lapho kulelo verse.
And to explain that, you just go to the book
Uma-ke
of
ufuna
Revelation,
ukuyichaza-ke leyo nto uzoya encwadini ka-Revelation.
and the nicest place to go is Revelation
Futhi-ke indawo
17.
elula kakhulu ukuthi ungaya kuyo Revelation 17.
So in Revelation 17, it speaks about a beast that dies and gets
URevelation
resurrected.
17-ke ukhuluma ngesilo lapho esifayo bese sibuye sivuswe.
And that beast, we can understand it to be
Leso silo
power,
leso-ke singasisho ukuthi mhlambe sithi amandla,
enforcement.
i-enforcement, ukuphoqa.
So it could be police or the courts
Ngaba
or the military.
amaphoyisa, iy'nkantolo noma amasosha.
There's a resurrection of power,
Kunokuvuswa kwalamandla lawa.
and that's needed because of the person who is riding
Futhi-ke lokho
that beast.
kuyadingeka ngenxa yalo muntu-ke ogibele leso silo leso.
The person is riding a dead beast
Lo
for a
muntu-ke
while,
lo ugibele isilo esifile isikhashana esithize.
and therefore the beast is not supporting or helping that person.
Futhi-ke lesilo lesi asimsizi lo muntu.
In 11:40,
ku-11 verse 40
it says chariots, horsemen,
ithi
ships,
ama-chariot, ama-horsemen nemikhumbi, amandla lawa.
power. So when you bring these stories
Uma-ke
together,
uhlanganisa-ke lamabali lawa,
you see there's a resurrection
uzobona-ke
of the
futhi
king of the
kunalokuvuswa
north.
ke kwale nkosi yaseningizimu.
And when you see that,
Futhi ke uma uyibona leyo nto,
what you're able to do is to take one
uzokwazi ke
story
ukuthatha ibala elilodwa
and
bese
divide it into two.
uyayihlukanisa uyenza amabala amabili.
So the first story
Ibali ke lokuqala
begins at the time
liqala
of the
ngesikhathi
end,
sokuphela,
and then the king of the north
bese
will die.
inkosi yaseningizimu izokufa. Uma
In its
ifa
death, there's no power,
akunamandla lapho,
and then
bese
it
izobuya ibuye
resurrects.
futhi ke ivuke.
And when it resurrects, it will then have
Uma
power.
ivuka ke ibuya izoba namandla.
Revelation 17 explains this story
Revelation
very
17
well.
uyayichaza lento ngokusobala.
So the question is, when
Manje
does this
umbuzo
happen?
yiloko ukuthi yenzeka nini leyo nto.
That's what's
Yiyo ke into
crucial to
ebalulekile
us.
kithi le.
And because you're taking this story and we're
Futhi
going
ke
to
njengoba
cut it,
sizothatha le bali silisike,
we begin to have a clue of
siqala
when
ke
that will
ukubona
happen.
ukuthi izokwenzeka nini leyo nto. Sonke
We'll
ke
know the
siyazi
answer
impendulo.
at the time of the end.
Isikhathi sokuphela.
And because it's at the time of the end and we've cut this story, we can take this
Ngenxa
line and
yokuthi
link it
ku-time of
underneath.
the end futhi sinqumile le bali leyo, singathatha le siyibeke ngaphansi kwale.
So what we would normally do is we
Into
would
ke
do
esijwayele ukuthi
this.
siyenze ke siyenza kanje.
We'll call it 1 and
Sizoyibiza
2.
kanje ke sithi enye yi-1 enye yi-2.
But
Kodwa ke
we
siyazi
know that these don't happen at the same time. It's the
ukuthi
symbol that's the
lezi
same.
kubili kwazo kwenzeki ngesikhathi esisodwa, isimbolo efanayo.
Now, in this story of
Kule
Daniel
bali ke
11,
leli lika-Daniel 11,
we know the dates. We know that this is
siyawazi ama-date ke
1798,
siyazi ukuthi u-1798
and we know that this
futhi
is
siyazi futhi
1989.
loku 1989.
Now, because we're so used
Ngenxa
to doing
yokuthi ke
this,
sesijwayele kangaka ukwenza lokhu,
we tend to automatically bring the second line and line it directly under the
sivesane
first.
sithathe ke le line yesibili siyibeke ngaphansi kwale yokuqala.
But of course, we know that's not
Kodwa
how it
siyazi
works
ke
in real
ukuthi
life,
ngokweqiniso ayisebenzi kanjalo.
because there's no time at the end of resurrection at this
Ngoba
history.
akuna isikhathi sokuvuselelwa kulowo mlando lo.
It actually occurs
Iyenzeka
here
laphaya le.
in
ngo-1989.
1989. And so there's a waymark here
Kune-waymark ke lapho.
when you take this
Uma
story as you
uthatha
go
le
through.
bali ubhekisisa kahle.
And let me
Futhi
put
ke
it here
awuthi
with me.
ngiyibeke la ingaba khona kahle kahle.
It would actually be here.
Ingaba la kahle kahle.
So
Into
what we
ke
can do
esingayenza
is take this one line and bring this one underneath, and normally we would
ukuthi
place
ke
it here.
siyithathe le line le bese siyilethe la ngaphansi
But we know in
kodwa
reality it
siyazi
occurs
ngokweqiniso
here.
ukuthi ivela laphaya phambili
So in this
kuleli bali
story,
ke leli
this time
lesi
at the
isikhathi
end here,
sokuphela lesi
the
ukuvuka
resurrection actually becomes its own
kuba
waymark
yi-waymark
in this
nayo
story.
kuleli bali leli
And unless you're familiar with doing that, it
ngaphandle
can
ukuthi
confuse you.
uyazi leyo nto ingakumangaza uma ungayijwayelanga
So
into
what we're
esiyenzayo ke
doing, taking one story,
sithatha ibali elilodwa
in this story, it's verse
kule bali leli
40, 41.
u-40 no-41
And then we split
bese
the
ke
verse,
siyabona ke sihlukanisa le verse leli
and we say that there's a time at the end, and
sithi
there's a second
kune-time
time
of
at
the
the
end
end.
yokuqala ne-time of the end yesibili
Death and
ukufa nokuvuka
resurrection. And what we need to be able to
into
do in
kumele
our minds is take two concepts at the same
kumele
time.
sikwazi ukuthatha izinto ezimbili ngesikhathi esisodwa ey'ngqondweni zethu
We
siqhubeka
continue the
ngelayini
line. So this is a real
uma
waymark, this
kuyi-waymark
line.
yamampela kule line
But we can also divide the line
kodwa
and
futhi
repeat and enlarge.
singayihlukanisa le line senze i-repeat and enlarge
So we can take this portion and it comes all the way underneath, and you line up the time of the ends, which is what we tend to
singathatha ke
often do.
le time of the end siyilethe la ngaphansi siqondanise into esijwayele ukuyenza leyo kodwa ke
But this resurrection, the second time of the end, actually occurs at a different point in history, 1989,
lokuvuka lokhu
1798.
ke
There's a
le
span
time
of
of the
time
end
between
yesibili
them.
iyenzeka ngesikhathi esihlukene kunesikhathi esithize phakathi kwaso
You need to take both concepts, a continuum and repeat and enlarge, and handle them
kumele
at the same
uzibone
time.
lezinto zombili ukuthi iyaqhubeka kodwa yenzeka ngesikhathi esisodwa
Now we call this the time of the end,
siyayibiza ke le nto
end,
sithi isikhathi sokuphela phela
but it's
kodwa
actually
kahle
the
kahle
beginning.
iwukuqala
The time of the end can be considered as a point in time and a
i-time of the end
dispensation.
singasho sithi isikhathi esithize kodwa futhi ke i-point
Ellen White's
ne-dispensation
clear on
u-Ellen
that.
White uyakuchaza lokho
She says we are living in the time of the end, not at
uyasho
the time of
ukuthi
the end.
siphila esikhathini sokuphela hhayi ukuthi siphila kuyisikhathi
So the
sokuphela
time of the end, the waymark, is the start or the
i-waymark
beginning.
ke yaloku iwukuqala
And that's the argument that we can use in the story of Paul.
yiyo ke
Acts
enye
27.
into esingayisebenzisa le kwibali lika-Paul u-Acts 27
That there's going to be a start of the journey in Caesarea,
ukuthi kuzoba nalokuqala kwalokuhamba lokhu eCesarea
where for our purposes we're going to say
lapho
judgment
ke
begins.
sizothi kuqala ukwahlulelwa
But he's
kodwa
not
ke
being judged yet.
akahlulelwi kokwamanje
He's going to the court of death
usaya
to
kule
be
nkantolo
judged.
yokufa lapho ayohlulelwa khona
So we can mark Caesarea as the time
singabeka
of
ke
the end.
iCesarea lapho njengesikhathi sokuphela
Now, as we find in this story here,
uma
two lines,
sibona ke kule bali lelo ama-line
One
amabili
time of the end, symbol,
i-time of the end futhi eyodwa
but two different
Kod-
dates
kodwa
or
ibe
starting
nama-dates
points.
amabili ahlukene indawo ezimbili zokuqala.
This is what was found by Elder Tess
Yiyo
in
ke
Acts
le nto le
27,
etholwe u-Elder Tess kwi-Acts 27
that there's one story that's divided and
ukuthi
repeated
kunale
and
bali
enlarged.
elilodwa elihlukanisiwe laphindwa kabili.
They both start at the time of the
Ubabili
end,
aqala ku-time of the end.
but the time of the end in each story
Kodwa
is
i-time of the
different.
end kuzo le ndawo ezimbili ihlukene.
Just as it is in Daniel
Njengoba ke
11.
siyibona ku-Daniel 11.
So I want us to hold that thought in our
Ngifuna ke
mind,
siyibambe engqondweni zethu leyo nto.
and tomorrow we'll continue this
Futhi ke
discussion.
nakusasa sizoyibhekisisa kahle le nto.
And I'm sure in the meantime, many of you will either review some of these studies or look at the lines to see this.
Ngiyazi ke
Welcome
abanye
you to
benu
do that.
nizoyibheka le nto niyibhekisise kahle futhi ke ngiyanamukela ukuthi nikwenze lokho.
And I've sent you my thoughts on why the Levites are
Futhi
not
ke
joining us.
ngithumele mina ke cabango yami ukuthi kungani ama-Levites angahlanganyeli nathi.
And I welcome your thoughts on it. And if I get any feedback from people, I'll share
Futhi
that tomorrow.
ngiyamukela imicabango yenu. Uma ke ngiyizwile imicabango yenu ngizophana ngayo kusasa.
Okay, I want to
Ngiyanibonga ke
thank you
nonke.
all. And let's close
Futhi
with
ke
a word of
singavala
prayer.
ngomkhuleko.
Holy God,
Nkulunkulu wethu,
we thank you for all that you have
siyabonga
done
ngakho
for us
konke osenzele kona.
and all that you
Nako
continue to do
konke
for us.
ojwayele ukusenzela kona. Qhubeka ukusenzela kona.
In the past, we would say that you have mercy,
Mandulo besizothi unomusa kithi.
but the more we
Kodwa
understand
ke uma
who
silo
you are,
sizwisisa ukuthi ubani,
through understanding who
sibona
we
nokuthi
are,
thina siyobani.
we realize that you are not just a
Siyazwisisa
merciful
ukuthi
God,
awusunkulunkulu nje kuphela onomusa,
but you're a God of understanding and
ukuthi
knowledge,
uNkulunkulu wokuzwisisa futhi wolwazi.
a person who knows and understands our
Umuntu
construction.
osaziyo, osizwisisayo nokuthi sakhe kanjani.
Therefore, you do not overlook our faults or
Kanjalo
our
ke
defects.
awubeki eceleni amaphutha wethu.
Sometimes we
Ezinye
call them
inkathi sithi
mistakes,
amaphutha,
but you who constructed us
kodwa ke wena osakhile
understand how we
uyazwisisa
were
ukuthi
made.
senziwa kanjani.
Help each of us to know ourselves and to
Sincede
understand
ke
one
sonke
another.
ukuthi sizwisise futhi sizwisise nabanye.
Help us to have confidence in the structures that have been given to us by the Holy
Sisize
Spirit.
ukuba nokuthemba le zinto lezi sizinikezwe uMoya Ongcwele.
We all are
Sonke
kneeling
ke
before you,
siguqe la phambi kwakho.
and we want to take a moment to thank you and acknowledge
Futhi
our
sifuna
elder.
uthatha le thuba lokubonga sikhulekele nomdala wethu.
We ask that you would be with her and strengthen
Siyakhuleka
and
ukuthi
guide
ube
her.
naye futhi umqinise umnikeze amandla.
and help her too to have confidence
umsize
in these
naye
lines.
abe nokuthemba kulama line.
Help us to understand and remind us how to construct these lines.
Sincede ukuzwisisa nokwazi ukuthi siwakhe kanjani lama line.
May we never forget that we are living in a
Ingakhohlwa
spiritual
ukuthi
realm.
siphila ezweni lesimoya.
A kingdom that's
Umbuso
not of this world.
kungasiwona walomhlaba.
And help that understanding to shape and mold how we view ourselves and our interaction with
Usisize ke
the world.
ukuthi ukuzwisisa lokho kube indlela yokubuka lo mhlaba nazonke izinto ngendlela ethize.
In Jesus'
Igama
name,
likaJesu.
amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.
Siyabonga.
And you over
Merci,
to our host.